All right, I'm joined by my colleagues, Katelyn Tocci and Alex Cyr, the Marathon Handbook. And we're going to talk today all about marathon majors. Marathon major season, the fall season is in the air. And there's been a couple of interesting turns of events in the world of the marathon majors, specifically Boston, which I know is coming up next April, but there's some interesting news coming out of the Boston Marathon this week. Definitely worth talking about. And then Sydney, and you think to yourself, but Sydney Marathon's not a world marathon major. Perhaps it will become one in the very near future. We'll unpack that. And also, Alex, we're going to talk about your shiny new 5K PR, or is it PB? What do you got? Are you PR or PB? It's like
PB where I'm from, but if I go to the States, or pretty much everywhere else, I say PR.
I was going to say
That's
PR.
right.
PR for me.
PR is
Personal
public
record.
relations around here.
Got it.
Your shiny new 5K personal best. We'll call it that. We'll get to that. We'll get to that in a bit, and we're going to glean as much as we can from you, Alex, about how it is that you achieved your new 5K time and what your tips and tricks are for that. Okay, first things first, guys. Boston Marathon.
Oof.
Our colleague Jesse Carveth reported in the last couple of days. We're recording on Wednesday. Pod hits the platforms on Thursday morning. That the Boston Marathon is lowering its qualification standards. Take a deep breath, Katelyn. Don't worry, it's not going to affect your entry for next year. For 2026, the numbers are coming down across the board.
Yep.
If you're between the ages of 18 and 59, you're looking at a 5-minute haircut on your qualification time, on that BQ time, which is like
a huge amount of time.
Yeah.
I received an immediate message from one of my athletes where we are like right there. We're like so close. And he wrote me and he said, I don't even want to talk about it, Katelyn. And I was like, let's just not even talk about it. Let's just follow the path. Let's just continue with our cycles, continue with our plan, but let's not even think about it right now. So it was a blow, I'm sure, for a lot of people, not just for us, but for a lot of people.
Yeah, I guess the good news is that your athlete, or any athlete out there listening who's thinking to themselves like, okay, now I got 5 minutes plus to make up here. You got a year. So this is going to be implemented in the 2026 edition of the Boston Marathon.
Yeah.
Perhaps the gut punch here, although to the Boston Athletic Association that owns and operates the marathon, to their credit or in their defense, I think they only recognize that they really need to lower this number after they started tabulating who was going to get an entry for the 2025 event, because they got a record number of people applying, including yourself, Katelyn Tocci. And they got, where's the number here? It was a crazy number of people, 36,406 BQ submissions. And they only got about 22,000 spots for qualification, and they keep the remaining 8,000. It's a field of about 30,000 people. The remaining 8,000 are for charity runners, corporate bibs. So like if you're, say, the Bank of America, you get allocated a certain number of bibs to give away to your staff. And of course, our friends out in the influencing community get a few bibs too. So 22,000 spots, 36,406 applicants, which creates crazy math for the BAA, right? And last year it was what, Katelyn, around 5 minutes, I think, off the actual number, the stated number.
5.5, 5:29. You had to get, so you had your BQ, your Boston qualifying time, but you had to have that cushion of 5 minutes and 29 seconds to get in. So when you're looking at those times, you always have to think in the back of your head, I got to shave off. I need some sort of a cushion in there. I mean, that's just been what we've seen over the years. And even though they took that 5 minutes off, I am positive you're still going to see a huge group of people who are still going, they're going to have more applicants again. even with that 5-minute time shaved off. So they're going to have to shave off. Who knows? Maybe it won't be 5 minutes, but maybe it'll be another couple of minutes. You always want to have that cushion in there.
Yeah, Alex, we were there this past April covering the race live, and it was a lot of fun. Lots of people, a lot of influencers this past year. Be interesting to see how people feel about those who get an entry who maybe finish well off of the qualification standard for their age group. I wonder if there's going to be any pushback in the running community over this, but this has got to be a bit of a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people out there that were already pretty close to that time.
Yep.
I think they should really limit the number of influencer / corporate bibs that they dole out. I know there's a business behind it. There's a business case. But at the same time, it's like the harder the standard gets, and it should get harder because more people are running. And as people get into the sport, it gets tougher to be in the upper 20 or 10%. Sure. But as this happens, it becomes less and less excusable, I think, to put someone on the start line who just has a lot of Instagram followers, because it's becoming more of an elite race, right? And the more elite a race gets, the less it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that, we sort of side channeled about this, the three of us, in the springtime after Boston. Alex and I were both kind of like remarking at how many influencers were there creating content. And then in the aftermath, you just sort of saw on Instagram and YouTube and TikTok, like the amount of stuff that was getting put out in the world around Boston. And it was weird because it's like the Boston Marathon does not need any help from influencers.
No.
The Boston Marathon is the friggin' Boston Marathon.
You took the words out of my mouth. No one, they don't need the influencers. Everyone wants to go to Boston. I mean, we're seeing that with just the number of, these are the people who qualified, and everyone else who hasn't qualified yet wants to go to Boston. They don't need the help.
No. And the influencer content, a lot of it, I think, just accentuates the weird dichotomy that exists inside of the Boston Marathon, that every time you tune into ABC and you watch the broadcast for everyone, you see there are two sides. The one is like the race is somewhat labeled as like inclusive, a race for everybody. And in a sense, that's good. But also the times are getting a whole lot faster. And so I think there's a marketing issue to dance around here. Like, do we want to make the Boston Marathon as this like awesome race that everyone gets to do? And hey, look, there's Kevin Hart and this is so much fun. Or do we brand it as this is getting to be a very fast race? It's really hard to get into. And if you get into the Boston Marathon, you've accomplished something that's even greater than someone would have accomplished a few years ago, because this is becoming elite. So I don't know. I think that they have like they seem to have two marketing goals that are a little bit at odds.
I think it makes the Boston Marathon special. Like, that's one of the things that makes the Boston Marathon special, because you've got, the other races are also very tough to get into with lotteries. Absolutely. That's another factor. But I think that's what makes the Boston Marathon Boston. A lot of people leave Boston for last as well, because they're, getting better with each well, for last if they're doing all of the majors, because they're going through the different marathons, they're trying to get better and better. And it's like this amazing goal to have, to be able to do one of those qualifying times. So I think it's one of the things that sets Boston apart from some other marathons. It's wonderful to be inclusive and to be open to everyone, and for everyone to be able to have a chance to run the marathon. But Boston's really one of the very few that does that. So it's nice to see the differences. I mean, this is a very competitive marathon, and there are a lot of other marathons that are very, that you do almost all marathons that you will participate in a lottery for, and that you can participate in. So, kind of like a little special part of Boston, I think.
Yeah, I'll say that I actually think that the reason why Boston is so attractive to so many people, and why all these marathon majors are alluring, is because of their exclusivity, is because not only are they spread across the world and they're big races, but they're also tough to get into. New York, London, nearly impossible to get into. They reject far more people than Boston rejected last year. Boston rejected 11,039 people last year through the qualification process. New York and London reject like over 100,000 people through the lottery process, right? So in terms of like supply and demand, those other races are extremely exclusive and the most popular marathons in the world. So that exclusivity is a huge factor in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And Boston's well known for having this Boston qualification. It's pretty much always had some form of qualification. Katelyn, you did a little bit of a little research on the history of the BQ, which I think we should actually, like, if we don't already have it on the site, we should put that into like a fun little story on, like,
let's do that.
what the qualification was through the years, because it's changed, right? Like, it kind of ebbs and flows with the popularity of marathon running and the quality overall of marathon running, like the average overall quality of the recreational runner, right? So,
yeah, it's kind of funny. No, it's kind of funny because, well, I was reading that the qualification times popped up in the 1970s, but what I find is funny is that I think most of us would assume that they would have always gotten more difficult as they went, but that is not true. And I was really surprised to see that, because I was reading that from 1980 to 1986, the qualification times were actually more difficult, because we're talking the age group from 19 to 39. It was actually 250 for men and it was 320 for women. So it's funny to see, as what Michael said about the ebb and flow. So you've got, it actually got more difficult, and then they let up a little bit on it, and then now it's getting more difficult again.
Is that because the average finish time nowadays is slower than it used to be, even though the top end of these days is a lot quicker? Probably.
I think so. I will say, and this is a hat tip to, or a kudos to your generation, Alex, is in the battle days of the aughts, the 2000s, whatever you want to call them, when oldsters, when the baby boomers were kind of at their peak of that marathon boom in the 2000s. I believe the open standard time for Boston qualification was like 3:10, so it was pretty soft, and that was, I think, because the overall times were slower. They were getting less applicants for the race. And then that quickly changed. Or I think around 2010, there was like a huge flood of interest because the growth in the sport just kind of exploded at that point. So it got dropped down to 3:05. And then in 2019, they dropped it down to 3 hours for the open standard. And obviously there's like a cascade of 5 minutes with each age group, right? So right now, 2:55 just means like young millennials and Gen Z kids are fast. And super shoes are having an impact, obviously. And people are taking running seriously, which is cool.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
I like the increased competition. I think it's awesome, but it's just making it harder and harder.
Katelyn, have you heard back from the BAA? Did you get your acceptance?
I haven't. They did say that we wouldn't hear back until October. However, I've heard from others who have been accepted in the past, that they say that and then they do answer in the end of September. So I'm kind of like just checking my email every single morning to see if I've gotten anything, but no, not yet. But we do have to think it was just closing registration time was Friday, right? At 5 p.m. So, I have to wait. I have to be patient. Patience is a virtue, right? It's not mine. It's not my best trait, but I'll try to be patient.
They used to send you in the mail a card with like, the cornflower blue and maize yellow, or whatever the names of the colors are. And it just said on the front cover, like, the BAA has accepted you in the Boston Marathon. And like, bring this card to registration in April to get your bib. It's like, when you get that in the mail, man. So I guess they probably don't send that out anymore.
I would have loved that.
Yeah, now it's a drone that comes to your house.
Drop it off.
Some Amazon drone drops it off. All right, let's pivot into another intriguing development in the world of marathon majors. The Sydney Marathon, which just took place this past weekend, and was by all accounts a massive hit. 24-ish thousand people in all events. They got 3 events: the marathon, a 10K, and a 4.2K mini marathon. I think that's a kid's run, but they don't have a half, which is kind of interesting. They don't do a 5K, but they still get 24,000 people. The bulk of them in the marathon. I started going through the results this morning, guys, and prep for this. And it's like 800 plus people who broke 3 hours in that race, which is pretty impressive. I think it was 830, including 3 people that were exactly on 3 hours, 0 seconds. Like just why didn't you die for the line? So anyway, Sydney is an exciting race because it's looking like there was a Reuters report in the aftermath of this race indicating basically that it's all been confirmed by World Athletics and Abbott, which is the big sponsor of the World Marathon Majors series, that Sydney is going to be the 7th World Marathon Major to be included, and that will happen presumably in the 2026 edition of this race next fall. So if you've run the 6 marathon majors, I'll see if I can do this off the top of my head, guys. Tokyo, Boston, London. That's 3, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Berlin, Chicago, New York.
Yep. That's it.
Got it.
You got it.
That's in order too. Been doing this a long time. So if you've run the 6 marathon majors, you got that big, ridiculous 6-star medal. You're one of 10,000 or so people who've accomplished running all 6 world marathon majors. Get out your welding kit. We're going to be adding a 7th star to your dinner plate size medal because it sounds like Sydney is going to be in. How do you guys feel about this? Is this going to be marathon number 1 for you? Or are you a purist? Are you doing them in order when you start your marathon journey?
Let me finish a half marathon before I decide. Yeah, I was surprised. Like, the Sydney Marathon is not, I'll be honest, is not a marathon that I followed very much. It's not one that I'm used to seeing in the news. I had like a roster of other cities, Paris, Prague, even, I'm biased, but even Toronto, as candidates to potentially one day become majors. So it surprises me. It does surprise me. I would have guessed Paris if I had to put my money on the line.
Yeah, we'll get to our alternate suggestions to fill out the World Marathon Majors Series slate for 2026 and beyond in a minute. But yeah, let's just go through this quickly. Like, okay, so Sydney was spun up in 2001 in the aftermath of the 2000 Olympics. Alex was just a twinkle in his parents' eye back in 2000. How old were you in 2000, Alex?
5.
Awesome.
Oh,
I was 5. I still hope that I'm a twinkle in my parents' eye, but anyway.
I was like hanging out in some scuzzy loft apartment in Montreal with a bunch of like deadbeat drug dealers watching the 2000 Olympics.
In 2000, I was psyched because I was graduating high school. So we were, all psyched because it was like the millennial. We're going to graduate high school in 2000 and prom. Y2K, all that stuff. And yeah. I was at prom. I was at prom when Alex was 5.
Prom. Did you guys all go to prom?
Michael,
do you guys do reunions? We're just going to go down a rabbit hole here.
Okay, I bet
you guys do high school
go
reunions.
To prom.
I did go to prom.
You did go to prom. Okay.
Yeah, I went to prom.
Oh, good. Okay.
You don't strike me as a prom guy.
That's why.
I wore a tux, guys.
I need a photo.
I can produce a photo because when I went and visited my parents, my mom has a photo from my prom.
Oh my gosh.
On the wall, framed.
On the wall.
And I still remember. I remember that photo being taken. I remember standing out in the front lawn and behind like a flower bed or whatever. Anyway, yeah. Okay, so 2000, taking us back.
No, I still want to talk about Michael's prom.
Yeah, me too.
Let's talk about high school reunions. Let's pivot into that one. Yeah, so 2001, Sydney, really small race, 5,300 people. Oh, no, sorry. It was 1,200 people when it started out. Mm-hmm. And it was only 5,300 total participants as of 2022. That's not that long ago.
No.
And then all of a sudden it was 17,000 people in 2023. And then this year, 24,000 spots sold out completely. And then it got platinum level status from World Athletics, which if you're not a super nerd, platinum is the highest sort of grading from the global governing body of the sport. It basically just means this is a really well run, organized professional race. It's got an elite field. They shut down the roads, and it's a big looped course, or point to point course. Oh, not a point to point course, there and back course, and road closures, police accompaniment, certain size field, and all the other sort of accoutrements of a big city race, right? So they scaled this sucker up fast.
They really did.
It's kind of mind-blowing. I'm a little skeptical of it. I don't know why, just because it's just come together so quickly. And now they're vying for this spot, and it sounds like they got it. So in 2021, they were included as one of 3 cities that was going to be evaluated to become a world marathon major. Beginning in 2022, and then last year and this year, their races have been under the scrutiny of Abbott and World Athletics to check off those boxes. And it sounds like, by all accounts, like full success. Sydney's in. That's what it sounds like, which is wild. I hadn't
really paid a lot of attention to it either. We did have a couple of Costa Ricans go this year, and so it kind of started to get on my radar. But when it really got on my radar was about a little over a year ago, because one of my athletes was going to participate in it because he had classified or qualified for the age group world championships. So we've been training for over a year for this marathon, doing some other stuff in the meantime as well. And I just need to make a very small shout out to Jeffrey because he had classified for the age group world championships in Sydney, he's 73 years old. So it was for,
oh, wow.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's an incredible athlete. It's been amazing training him for this. And so not only did he PB in this marathon, and we've done 2 marathons previous to this one. So he PB with 3:23, and he came in second place. So wow. Yeah, so he's going, and he's automatically invited to the World Championships, which are going to be held in the New York Marathon next year, which was very cool. Yeah, it was super cool. And I checked the field, and I mean, there were 97 runners between 70 and 74 years old. Isn't that?
Wow.
It was amazing. So yeah, I know. I was psyched.
So hold on, this guy ran a like a just straight numbers personal best in the marathon at age 73.
Yeah, well, he was, he didn't start. He hasn't been running all of his life, so that's what's been super awesome. And this is why I think he's so incredibly inspiring, because I want people to understand that, you can start running in your 50s and 60s or your 60s, and you can still achieve these like amazing times, by putting the time in. And so, yeah, Jeffrey's a super incredible, inspiring story, because it's like 73 PBing at a marathon and coming in second place in your age group. So anyway, so
3:23, that's sub 5 minute kilometer pace. Yep. for 42 kilometers.
It is. Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. It was awesome. So it was such a win this weekend. So, he was psyched. He couldn't believe, call me from the finish line, and we just, really enjoyed it. So yeah,
we should have like piped Jeffrey in here for his take on the experience on the race. Did he say anything about the race at all? I mean,
he was very worried. Race. Yeah, he was very worried it was going to be hard because, Boston and the hills, and that was a tough one here in Boston as well this year. And it was tough because of the hills, but he did a great job. We kind of just celebrated, and we got to have that like sit down talk, when the marathon's over and you're a little bit more recovered. But I'm sure he was going to find the hills a little tricky. So, and that's something that we haven't mentioned yet, that it's supposed to be a close to New York tricky, right? With the elevation gain.
Yeah. I was looking at the course. There's a lot of up and down. This is another kind of intriguing and slightly mystifying element in all of this, in this decision-making process, where it's like the world marathon majors can kind of be divided right down the middle between 2 very specific types of race. On the one hand, you've got these like very flat, very fast paced races where you see world records. So I'm thinking along the lines of like certainly London, Berlin, Chicago, where Chicago is the current course where the men's world record is, and Berlin has the women's world record currently. And then London has seen world records in the past. Tokyo is actually a fairly flat and fast course as well. Boston and New York, very different story. Very tricky, very hilly, not paced races. So I don't know what the scene is like in Sydney for the elite races, but just looking at the course records, they're not very fast. They're like 206 and 221, which is not super quick. And if you look at the course profile, it's like you've said, Katelyn, more of a New York Boston experience,
right?
Which, I mean, does that detract from getting on an airplane if you're American and flying for half a day and then running that race? I don't know. That's a good question. Sydney's certainly an interesting place to visit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm sure.
So looking at the schedule for 2025, we're still 2024.
Yes.
Is March 2nd, Tokyo, April 21st, the Boston Marathon. Katelyn Tocci will be there.
So much pressure.
April 27th, less than 1 week later, 6 days later, as it always is, the London Marathon. And then we jump forward to the fall. September 14th, the Sydney Marathon. September 21st, a week later, Berlin Marathon. October 12th, Chicago. November 2nd, the New York City Marathon, the last marathon major of the year. Okay. Last thing on this before we focus on the Alex Cyr 5K experience. Other races, Alex, you flicked at this. Okay, first of all, there's two other races. I mentioned off the top that there was 3 races under scrutiny to become the next World Marathon Majors. They've not indicated whether or not all 3 of these races are sort of being fast-tracked in, or whether this was just kind of like a fight for that one spot. It's not clear. It could just be that Sydney is going to be the next World Marathon Major, and then the other 2, too bad, so sad. I don't know. But the other 2 that were confirmed by Abbott to be evaluated were the Cape Town Marathon, which is coming up in October, and as well the Chengdu Marathon, which is in the Sichuan province in southwest China, which is also coming up in October. So two October races. I gotta say, neither of these races are like super on my radar. They're both gold label races in World Athletics, so they're like they're of a certain quality. Chengdu is like a pretty big event. It's like 30 to 35,000 runners, but it only started, I think, in 2017. And Cape Town's been around for a bit longer, but I don't think it's a huge event. Nice tourist destination though. So Alex, you sort of teased at what you thought should have been the next World Marathon Majors for consideration. What give me your list again.
So Paris, Prague, maybe Toronto, I think are all candidates. Although now that I rethink this, none of them would have been my prime candidate.
Okay.
The race I would choose is Valencia for 2 reasons. The first, they seem to have an awesome program there. They have wicked prize purses. They clearly know what they're doing. They attract top talent every year. The second reason is, and hear me out, this might be controversial for some people, but we have 2 marathon seasons, okay, spring and fall. And realistically, we have 2 marathon seasons that each last like barely, like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, call it a month, right? Most of these races are in clusters. 2 happen in a week in April. What happens if your training schedule doesn't necessarily align for the spring or the fall? What if there were a marathon in early December or late November for people who prefer to train in August, September, October? Mm-hmm. Like, and Valencia is probably a great candidate for that, because I think the weather around early December, late November, because I think the race is the first weekend of December. Do I have that right? It's usually around December 1st. The weather's actually kind of nice. And so why not have it then?
This is a great question. I've run a December race before. I've run the California International Marathon in Sacramento, which is the first weekend in December, very similar to Valencia, which is always the first weekend in December as well. I believe Valencia is December 1st this year. Mm-hmm. It's a great time of year, especially if you had a bit of a false start in your marathon training. Say you were planning on doing a September or October race and you had an injury or life got in the way and you had a late start. There are races in like mid to late November and early December that kind of save the day for that, right? And also usually the weather, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, is a little bit cooler and it usually produces a pretty great result. I totally agree with you. I think Valencia is like kind of the obvious no-brainer fit. It's one of the fastest races in the world. It's produced some of the fastest times ever. So on an elite level, it's like, it's got that locked down. I mean, they're like dangling a huge prize purse this year coming up. So obviously they mean business when it comes to the elite end of the sport. Something like 30,000 people run Valencia every year. So there's a lot of interest in the race. It looks like an awesome race, very flat, nice part of the world. I think the thing that's got going against it is there's a lot of European presence on the World Marathon Major calendar already, which I think probably takes away from this. So if you're going after trying to be a truly global series, you kind of have to start getting out of North America and Europe and planting the flag elsewhere in the world. But it's too bad Valencia isn't. We were kind of talking about this before we hit record on the pod, that these marathon majors, they're sort of like a major sports league, right? Like the World Marathon Majors as a whole is kind of like the NFL, for example. And Katelyn's going to hate this comp, but I'm like, the Boston Marathon is like the Dallas Cowboys.
It's like, how can you even do that? The Boston Marathon are the Patriots, obviously.
No, but I just mean like it's the biggest, grandest, oldest, most important, most followed, most interested.
Exactly.
It's like the Dallas Cowboys.
No. Oh my God, Michael, we have to talk football.
The Patriots were, I mean, they were anyway. Okay. Sure. Okay. It's like the New England Patriots.
Thank you. Okay. You can't touch the Patriots or Tom Brady. Okay.
No. And New York is like the Dallas Cowboys.
Oh, there you go.
Yikes.
We don't have anyone from New York here, so it's okay.
Yeah. Who's the Jerry Jones of marathon running? Some like completely half crazed race director. No. Yeah. So each of these races are sort of like a franchise unto themselves. They have a lot of power, each of them. I don't think the World Marathon Majors or Abbott or anybody else could turn to New York or Boston and try to tell them what to do with their race. They'd just be kind of like, yeah, that's nice. We kind of know what we're doing, right? Like we've sort of built something successful here. And they probably have more input into what the World Marathon Majors are up to than vice versa. But now we've got a scenario where we've got, it's like a expansion. They're expanding the franchise base here. They're bringing in a Sydney, maybe a Cape Town. And how much influence, how those races, whether they have any influence or whether they're being molded in sort of the idea of a Berlin, a London, a New York, a Chicago, remains to be seen. It's kind of an interesting question. I don't know. We don't have an answer for that one right now, but
yeah, but already you can already tell that Valencia kind of is not it, right? It's not the same product as a Berlin or a London or a New York, right? It already has, I think, prize money that these other races don't offer. I think I'm right in saying that, right? And so maybe if we keep going with the sports analogy, the comparison might be the majors are the PGA, the Professional Golf Association, and Valencia is LIV, right? The new golf league coming from the other side of the Atlantic that has its own way of doing things, has a whole lot of money backing it, and that might not want to have much to do with the PGA and not want to comply to their governance now or ever. And so this is getting into conspiracy land, but I wonder if Valencia saw this call from the marathon majors and said, nah,
okay,
we don't need it. We don't want this.
We're going after that Saudi money. We're good.
Who knows?
No. Don't want to get into geopolitics right now, but yeah, that could be it. I don't know. This is a good question. it seems to me everything that Valencia was doing was sort of like framing it to be the next world marathon major. But they already got a few races in Europe, right? So for me, Rotterdam, which has been around for a million years, is a fast race, has a great history, gets a big field every year. I feel like Rotterdam has sort of been overlooked. Also, say they roll in Cape Town and Chengdu as well. Those are both October races. So then, just going back here, bringing up my notes, that would make it 3 races in the spring, then a big pause, then 2 September races, 3 October races back to back to back, and a November race in New York City to close things out. That's 9 races with a huge fall slate and a kind of a minor spring slate. Whereas Rotterdam, that's a spring race, right? So
what would
Paris,
be another good spring
race?
race? Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask, what do you guys think would be another good spring marathon to throw in there? Because I feel like, it should get a little more evened out.
I mean, with the love from the Paris Olympics, and that Paris marathon course is a great course, and it's a great event. It's already spun up to being a really huge, I think, one year they had around 50,000 people. I ran it once, and it's a great event.
Oh, wow.
Could see Paris as being an obvious fit. But then again, another sort of like big European capital, Western European race. Like, I'm not sure if it fits right now, which is too bad. But
yeah, I think the fact that the other 2 candidates are Cape Town and Chengdu probably points to that they were looking to geographically diversify their offering, because I mean, and it's a small slap in the face to Toronto, which would have been the first Canadian marathon.
Oh my God. No. I love Toronto. We live in Toronto, Alex, but like, it's not quite there yet.
No, but it would have been cool to see it.
One can dream. Yeah. Okay, let's pivot out of World Marathon Majors land. I should say, to tease next week, we will definitely be doing a Berlin preview in next week's show, because the Berlin Marathon is right around the corner, and we'll also be doing an instant reaction pod following the Berlin Marathon. So that'll drop in your podcast. If you subscribe to the show, it'll just appear on Sunday afternoon or even Sunday morning. I'm not sure exactly when we're doing this, because the Berlin Marathon will be the Berlin Marathon will be in the middle of the night Eastern time, but we'll discuss it at a
decent hour,
civilized hour on Sunday morning after the fact. We have yet to plan that one out, but it won't be as long as our typical pods, and it will just hit on the race overall. We'll try to get some intel as to what the experience of the race was like from some people perhaps that were on the ground as well. So keep an eye out for that. Let's go from the marathon, scale all the way down to something that I think is actually much more brutal than a marathon. The condensed, crystallized form of the marathon in just 5 kilometers, the 5K. And Alex Cyr, let's put you in the spotlight for a couple seconds.
Yeah.
So we kind of glazed over this in last week's show, I believe, but you recently ran a 5K PB, PR. You ran a really fast 5K, your fastest road 5K ever. And we thought we'd take this opportunity to pick your brain while it's still
pump
fresh.
My tires? Okay.
Yeah, pump your tires a little
Please.
bit. Like, make you feel good about yourself, because you need more. Alex needs more confidence right now. We just need to give him. We need to inflate his ego further, and we just wanted to pick his brain about kind of what he did differently, some specific experiences, workouts, his thought process, what the race itself was like, in order to achieve that. We'll call it a PR.
Sure.
So first of all, just wow us with the time. What was the time again?
14:26.
I got
Bravo.
it. Okay, so the non-existent ego that I have just got deflated, if that's possible.
What little ego I had left.
What little ego I ever had.
I think I've absorbed it, Katelyn.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. You're like some sort of like like evil monster that's just sucking up everyone else's ego in your path and making yourself more powerful.
I'm happy for you, Alex. No, I have no idea.
Knives out. So 1426, what is that? What's that per K? So it's a 5K. What's that per kilometer?
It's just around 253, a little hair over 253.
Holy moly. I was literally running 400-meter repeats on Tuesday, slower than that. Just to let you know, stopping in between each one, like collapsing on the side of the road, catching my breath and doing it again. Sorry, I just wanted to throw that out there just to, for more of a normal person here looking at that time. Congratulations, Alex. You're like amazing.
Yeah, I could squeeze out one of those kilometers and then I'd be just done.
Toast.
Done.
Yeah. Well, it's relative, right? I did not win the race. I should mention, like I was fourth. Like there were guys ahead of me.
Oh no!
It was a good race, like a real race. The four of us were running together between kilometers 3 and 4.2 or 3, and then the other 3 ran off, and I held on for dear life, but finished fourth.
We'll talk about the race in a second here, but I just figured before we get into race day, and you tell us the story of the 1426.
Wow.
So like going into it, you obviously made some changes. Katelyn and I got to hear you complain about being injured quite a bit several months ago. You've worked your way through that, obviously feeling pretty good now. Mm-hmm. So what are some things that you've done differently this season to kind of, some things that you've done differently that I think our listeners can kind of take away from, regardless of whether or not you're a 1426 runner, or say you're trying to break 20 minutes in the 5K or even 25 minutes in the 5K. Like what are some sort of overall changes that you made you think helped you towards having success?
Yeah, I think what I did, it doesn't depend on speed whatsoever. I think it's pretty universal. There's like one overarching thing I did, and then that led to a few other changes. And the main thing was I hired a coach. And I know we've talked about this in former podcasts. And the reason that I'm mentioning it is because that is probably the reason for most of my other changes as well. So I started working with my coach, John LaFranco, I think in June. And the buildup was different in a sense that I took a lot longer to build back up to regular mileage. Like it was probably almost a 2-month process, which when you say it at face value, it sounds like so much. And you think, I don't want to spend 2 months building back up to regular mileage. But I think what we don't realize, and what I don't think I quite grasped before, is that the buildup is not all that onerous, right? The first week or couple weeks, yes, I'm walk running and it's not that fun and you feel like you have such a long way to go. But after a few weeks, you start to feel progress. And even if you're not slamming hard weeks of mileage, you still get the same high and the same fun, because I think we're into the progression of it, seeing improvements wherever that is. Mm-hmm. So these few months of buildup were a lot slower and actually quite enjoyable. So I think that was the first thing. Another difference, I guess I'll get into the workouts a little bit and how that was different. The 5K was my first race of the season. It wasn't my goal race. So my goal race is actually a half marathon that is happening in October, 6 weeks after this 5K. I'm between races 1 and 2 right now, and I'm planning 4 races in the season, each in 2-week intervals. So this 5K was an icebreaker. In the past, I tried to be ready for my icebreakers. I think it might have been an ego thing, or just like I wanted to make sure I'd get to the start line feeling fast and knowing that I'm ready to race. Even if it was an icebreaker, I tell myself, I want it to be good. This time around, I didn't do any specific 5K training. And what I mean by that is, a very specific 5K workout for me might be like 5 times 1 kilometer with 90 seconds break in between each. So basically you're running the race with a few breaks, maybe a week or 10 days before race time.
If only the 5K were like that. You could just take a 90-second break in between each kilometer.
So you're running each kilometer at 5K pace, right?
Yeah.
At your
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you finish it saying I've done 5K of effort at my 5K goal race pace. You know,
so like a VO2 max workout.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't do any of that. The workouts leading up to it were threshold workouts. So roughly the pace that you can hold for about an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So a regular week for me would look like, you know, probably a workout on Tuesday and Thursday, which were usually either mirror images of each other or the same workout. So if one, for example, would be 4 times 5 minutes at threshold pace with 2 minutes of easy running in between each rep. And I do that Tuesday, Thursday, and on Saturday, I would usually have my long run, which around, you know, my training days of late August, where I had finally built up to somewhat regular mileage, was about 90 minutes of long running. And inside of that, I would do 3 times 10 minutes at that same threshold pace, right? Like the pace that you can hold for an hour. So there were no hard 800 meter intervals, no hard 1 kilometer repeats, mile repeats, none of that. Another change I made in the training, and this is directly from John, is the addition of a small fartlek inside of most of my runs. So say I run 6 days a week. In almost all of my runs, including the workout runs, I would do this sequence. So I'll just rhyme it out because that's probably the easiest way.
Okay.
1 minute of hard running. And this is like at maybe call it your 5K to 10K pace, like a good, healthy stride. Okay. You're running quickly. 1 minute at that pace, 2 minutes of easy running, 45 seconds stride, 1.5 minutes of easy running. 2 times 30 seconds with 1 minute of easy running between each, and then finish off with 4 times 15 seconds with 45 seconds of easy running between each. Now, if you want to like incorporate this, just
confused.
like go back, you'll have to like go back and listen to the pod. Like it's easier in writing, but anyway, I've listed it that way so that if you want to try it, like just listen and write it down. But it's a sequence. Maybe we can like add the little, we can copy paste it in the show notes or something.
It's a good idea. And we'll do that. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes about 10 minutes, like a 10-minute sequence, gets your heart rate up. It's not something that I ever really did, but it's just a way to incorporate a bit of speed inside of your week. So looking through my week, I would be working somewhat hard at something every day, but I can't recall destroying myself in a workout once inside of this entire build, which is kind of strange. So I got to this race thinking, okay, this is going to be, I was nervous because I didn't really have this like idea of a recent idea of what it felt like to really, really hurt. But the race went incredibly well. Like my goal was to break 15 minutes. A 14:59, I would have been over the moon because I told myself exactly that. I'm rusty. I haven't raced in a long time. If I go 14:59, it's amazing. And ended up going much faster. And I have to say that's a combination of getting stronger, a lot of strength work inside of my running. And I think these strides, these little fartleks helped because at the end of a week, 4 or 5 times a week, I'm running at a pretty fast pace inside of these short intervals. So those were the main changes that I did. I think my takeaway so far is that, you can surprise yourself even if you haven't done hugely specific work. And my goal, and I think John's goal, and would have to ask him that personally, is that now that I'm strong and I can handle a lot of mileage, now we can turn the screw. And I'm guessing that in the next few weeks, workouts are going to become more VO2 max, like with harder intervals, harder reps, and they're going to hurt more. In fact, in the last week, I've already started seeing like a difference in the types of the workouts are similar, like 5-minute intervals, 6-minute intervals, but I'm doing them much faster because that's the instruction. So the energy system is changing a little bit too.
And we should say your end game here is that you're trying to break a huge barrier that for you has been a long time coming and is a big like lifetime goal in running, which is
I want to break 30 in the 10K. It's been a lifetime goal, and it's felt like a realistic goal for the last 2 years. And I've probably attempted it like 5 or 6 times, and I think 4 of those seasons ended in injury before I actually got the chance to take a fair crack. And the other 2 times, I just came a little short. I ran a 30, 30, a 30, 15.
Oh.
That was a downhill course too. So, I'm kind of happy I didn't break it that race, because I think it would have been left with a question mark. But it's felt like very much within my reach for 2 years now. And so on Sunday, so 3 days after this goes live, I'm racing a 10K in Vancouver.
Oh,
and
awesome.
And I'm making an attempt at it. I hear the course is a little challenging, but not overly so, and that people have broken 30 in it before. So I think I have a fair shot.
Good luck.
Oh, it's exciting. Yeah.
Thank you.
If you break 30, there might be a video that might get created out of it. So
I think we're going to create it either way, but
I like that.
You don't know if it's comedy or tragedy just yet, or maybe it's volume 1 of 2. I don't know, but
okay.
I'm pretty committed to making this video either way.
Oh yes, the phoenix needs to rise from the ashes, right? The darkness before the dawn. Of course, the narrative arc. Well, hopefully your narrative arc is like unconventional, and you just smash it this coming weekend. Yeah. Okay, so race day itself, I guess we should give like a little shout out to the race was in Toronto, right? So tell us about like race week and race day. Anything different, or any takeaways that you can share with our listeners about kind of the prep that you did that worked, and how you had success running what sounds like a pretty like solid, strong, confident 5K.
Michael, you're setting me up so much. The week was completely unconventional. It made no sense. Like, I have no advice because it didn't seem to make much sense. I hurt my back like 10 days before the race. And so the days 10, 9, 8, let's call them, pre-race, I was out of commission. I could barely walk. And then luckily, because it was just a pulled muscle, the pulled muscle did what pulled muscles do. And on day 3, it magically healed itself. Or I should say, like what do you call them? Grade 1 tears or whatever. Some tears take longer. But when I got back, I was just about to leave for a trip to France. I was running in the Alps. So we made a video about this. And I know we've talked about this on the podcast. So the week leading up to the race, I ran very low mileage. I did a lot of hiking in the Alps. I think I benefited from a type of pseudo taper. I got to the race feeling very rested. And I mean, when you're not training normally or properly for 10 days, one of two things happen. You show up feeling incredibly stale and rusty and it just doesn't go your way. Or you show up incredibly rested and you run out of your mind. And I think I just lucked out, and it was the latter and not the former. But I was thinking about this because we talked before the podcast. It's like, what's the takeaway? What's the advice to give to someone who's trying to break, either it's trying to hit a certain mark over 5K or just break the ice and run their first race of the season? I'm actually, and I didn't do this because of the circumstance, but I'm actually a big fan of not changing very much. And that means the obvious, like, don't try any crazy new foods. Maybe don't travel overseas the few days before your race. Try to live a very normal life. Try to keep it low key. But also, I think that means don't taper for every race. If you're somebody who has 3 or 4 races lined up before your goal race, there's no shame in maybe taking 10 minutes off the run before your race, or maybe taking the workout before your race a tad easier. That's fine. But don't go into a huge taper for every single race, because those weeks, even though you're racing, are meant to service a bigger goal down the line. And so you need to ask yourself what your goal is. You need to be honest about that. If your goal is to run a wicked 5K and 10K early in the season and shut it down, sure. But if your season is a bit shaped like mine, which has the ultimate goal of running a good half marathon. Yeah, I should mention this 10K is somewhat incidental to the half marathon training. I wasn't even going to go to Vancouver, and then the opportunity presented itself, so I'm adding it in. Anyway, if your season is shaped like that, don't go to 3 or 4 different tapers over the year. You need down weeks, but that's not the same as a full-on taper. And so if you're racing early in September, like, don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. Like, think of like your past weeks, and if they went well, and if they did, try to replicate them.
Yeah. If you do your workout on a Thursday, move it to a Wednesday, or and take it a little lighter, or maybe don't do a workout at all that week, but like still run. And maybe you take a day off before the race. If you take a day off, typically program it in for the day before the race, even if it's not when you typically take a day off. Things like that. But we always say, like, especially in marathon training, like train through, through a non-goal race. If the race is merely an attempt to give yourself a little bit of an experience of like going through the process of getting the race jitters out, of prepping for a race, of wearing the race shoes and your kit you're going to wear. If it's a longer event, like a half marathon, say a month before a big goal race or 5 weeks before a big goal race, you're practicing your fueling a little bit, things like that. Treat it as a dress rehearsal. And sometimes, like with Alex's case, you get like, knock it out of the park and you get yourself a shiny new fast time. In other cases, it's just a good learning experience, and you got to feel what it was like to put yourself through that pressure that you experience in a goal race. But okay, cool. All right, guys. I mean, I think takeaways here are lactate threshold is king. I love it.
I love threshold workouts. I always feel like I'm getting better when I do threshold workouts. I agree.
Marathon training works for all distances, right down to 5K. It probably even works for 1,500 meters. They're aerobic events after all. They're not anaerobic events. So threshold is valuable. Volume is valuable. Traveling to the French Alps and eating tons of raclette the week of.
It's ill-advised, but if it happens, it happens.
If it happens, no big deal. And most importantly, music to Katelyn's ears. Coaches are key. Get yourself a coach. Have somebody who knows what they're doing help you succeed. All right, guys, that's our show for this week. Couple of quick things. One, keep an eye out on our site, marathonhandbook.com. It's changing.
Surprise.
Well, that's right. We'll talk about that more next week.
Yeah.
We got to, what we got to do? We got to drag Thomas, the founder of Marathon Handbook, onto this pod. Thomas, I know he listens to every episode through and through. Usually on his run at some weird time in the morning or late at night. Thomas, you're listening right now. We're going to get you onto the pod. We want to hear about this bold new direction we're going with the site.
Yep.
We've been working on it for months. It's super exciting. It's going to look really slick. We'll talk about it in more detail in the coming weeks. It's going to roll out next week or so.
It's very soon. It's imminent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It looks beautiful. So we got that. And then next week's show, we're definitely going to do, I just did a little quick glance at the calendar to make 100% certain. We're going to do a Berlin Marathon preview pod. We're going to talk about that race, about why Berlin's such a big deal, why it's so fast. We'll look at the elite field and what you should watch out for in that race, whether or not anyone's going to do anything extraordinary. Last year we had a huge, probably the biggest world record in, I don't know, like history in any event, like the craziest world record, whether we're going to see anything close to that this year or not. And then we'll slip in with a little instant reaction pod on Sunday at some point. So keep an eye out for throw you a little extra next week. And then the week after, we'll be right back into things again. We got so much coming up. We got Chicago, we got New York. We've got some other events we're going to, and I'll be podding from Chicago and New York with you guys as well. So that'll be fun.
Awesome.
And so full slate this fall, all systems go. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter and subscribe to the pod. If you haven't already, give us a rating and review. It helps us greatly. Team, nice work. Talk to you again next week.